David Ellefson. What's up, man?
Fran Strine, how are you, buddy?
I'm good, dude. This is so weird in this format, us chatting, because usually just pick up a phone call or meet somewhere and have
Yeah.
lunch or I want to lead with this, talking about food. If I'm not mistaken, I'm the first person to introduce you to Waffle House.
Well, I knew of it before and
Yeah.
probably ate one or two awful waffles there, but you and I made it like a go-to,
Oh,
like
man.
that's our spot. Yeah. We remember we went over to Jesse James Dupree, right? That's how his full name, right?
Yeah,
Isn't
from
it?
Jackal. Yeah.
From Jackal, yeah. I was working for Peavy, and so this was 2007 or 8 or something. And I was doing artist relations, and I would hire you to do most of my media stuff, photos, video, just all that stuff. And I was in Atlanta, and you said, let's go up and where you lived. And you said, well, let's go up to Jesse's house. So we went up there, hung out. And then afterwards, we were hungry on the way back home. So we stopped in. It was late at night. We stopped into a Waffle House. We're sitting down. There's no one in the place. And there's this guy swapping. Like I remember, it was like at the end of the Carol Burnett show, right? He's out there like mopping the floor with this god awful, dirty, stinky mop and dirty water, and we're sitting there in a booth, just the two of us, right? And all of a sudden, he comes along like we weren't even there and starts swapping under our feet, and we're
didn't even ask us to lift our feet, anything.
No, we're like, whoa, what the hell? And he's just like, just mopping, like as if we weren't even there. And if that doesn't get your appetite ready for a good old waffle, I don't know what does.
No shit. I remember looking in the bucket, there was like eggshells and like hair, like. And the cook, it was probably
the cook. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
it's probably the cook. Let me serve them their eggs.
Yeah, he's sitting there making your eggs, and like it's so hot in there, like sweat was dripping off his nose into the food. I'm like, it's all part of the experience,
dude. It's so gross. And sadly, or ironically, I should say, the food's actually not bad, And
it's so good, man.
Now fast forward 2019, I'm in the studio with Megadeth in Nashville, and on Sundays I usually go to church, right?
Yep.
I just born and raised Lutheran, right? So that's what we do, right? Go to church on Sunday, take the day off, pray over the meals, just what we do growing up, right? So I tell Kiko, our guitar player, I say, hey, you want to go to church? So one Sunday I bring him to kind of a modern church close by in the area. And then he goes, man, I want to go to a real kind of like old school gospel, type of church. And I said, okay. I said, we can. It's just, we are in the South, and there's kind of a, I said, let's find one. Because I guess he and his wife had been going to one in LA, and they really liked it a lot. And a lot of famous musicians, when they're off the road, they played there. A lot of people sang in the choir. So these are like professional, big time musicians, but I guess guys that played with Sting and all this kind of stuff. And so he wanted to really experience kind of the deep South true version of it. It's so to give a reference, if anyone's seen the Elvis movie, it's kind of the beginning where he's out doing these sort of, the revival where they tap your head and you've been saved, one of these kind of things. So we do that. We go there and they welcome us in and they're singing songs to us and doing this whole thing. And Kiko's just loving this, being a good Catholic from Brazil,
right.
And really, really getting the experience. And then afterwards I go, dude, we got to go to a Waffle House. Like this is just the cherry on top, So we go to a Waffle House, and it was kind of out in the suburbs, so it wasn't like the experience you got and I got to have,
Right.
But yeah,
I was going to say you didn't let him get bit by a snake handler or anything. So.
No. That's what I was expecting. I was expecting the altar call. You fall back into the arms of the crowd. Oh, I've been saved. One of these. But yeah. So and that, of course, again, and had to end with a Waffle House experience, which it did, and it was again a good waffle, I must say. So
yeah. So you and I go back quite a ways. Not this far, but Megadeth. I got the extreme pleasure and honor of seeing you guys on the Killing Is My Business tour in Atlanta.
I still can't even believe that. Isn't that unbelievable, dude?
Yeah,
I don't think I know. I know maybe 6 people from the Killing Is My Business tour, and you're one of them.
Really? Oh my God!
I'm just saying. I know the Anthrax guys. Obviously, there's those
For
of us
sure.
from back in the day. Mike Schnapp, of course, but who worked at Combat Records. But yeah, to just we and I did not know each other at that time, and I'll let you tell the story. But yeah, to just then connect years later and be industry friends together is amazing.
Yeah. So I knew who Metallica was, and the rumors were circulating that Mustaine was fired. Then this new band he formed, Megadeth, was a force to be reckoned with, and I'm like, I have to go. So me and my best friend Kevin went. It was crazy at the Metroplex in Atlanta. Chicken wire. People flying off the balcony, breaking their legs.
Yeah, it had an upstairs, downstairs, and what I remember from it is they had black and tans, which is they served Guinness, which was the dark beer, and then Bass Ale, which you would put on top. I mean, this is like a beer speedball. This is as close to Jägermeister as you could get before we all experienced Jägermeister.
Oh my God! Yeah. Now, would you be wasted on stage playing, or do you wait till after?
I was never. There's only one time I remember I was literally too drunk to play, and it was on my birthday on the Peace Cells tour. I just had Chris Poland on my podcast, and we were talking about that, because I could always tell looking at pictures of Chris if we were on heroin that day or if the heroin didn't show up and we had to drink as a substitute, right? I could always tell he was the giveaway. I can tell by the look on his face. Right. And of course, we're both sober guys now, right? This was many years ago, so we can laugh at it because it's in our past, But growing when I started, I started playing at age 10, 11. So I didn't, alcohol had not touched my lips, and I obviously very serious about playing and learning the craft of performing and ultimately being the craft of being a rock star. Believe it or not, there really is one, as you've been around it your whole life. And, then it's age 15, I had my first drink, and then that leads to everything else. And, finally I got sober at age 25 in 1990, like literally about a month before we recorded the Rust in Peace album.
Wow. I
got clean. So, every performance from Rust in Peace onward has all been through sober mind, sober hands, but look, there is magic in Killing Is My Business and Peace Cells, and the stuff. So far so good. So what? Those records that we did under the influence, if you will, right. Because look, it's just part of your lifestyle. It doesn't mean every day you're wasted, but it just does mean that look, that's just there's a cigarette in the ashtray, there's a beer on your amp, and there's whatever else around the studio or on the stage, right? So I would always try to keep it pretty together until after the show, and then have your after show party. But look, the culture in the band, I think a band named Megadeth, Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good. We're not a bunch of choir boys at that point,
No. And then speaking of Peace Cells, I think you guys did 2 nights at the Metroplex.
I think you're right. Yeah,
I was at both of them. And I was
in fact, I think you have a shot. You have a photo that you took. I think it was your photo. I had the yellow bass, right? And I don't know if yeah, dude, with the condom hanging up. Somehow I knew you'd have that photo for this.
Oh my God! This is just in case some growler wanted to jump on stage and get busy, right?
So exactly, I guess so. Or smack some guy in the front row with a condom on the base. I'd like to think it was not a used condom. It was out of the package, and who knows how it even got there. I had it on the whole show. Jesus.
Yeah, you did. And there's the balcony that we were talking about.
So yeah, keep this up. So yeah, this balcony here. Remember. So that went way out to where you are out here in the audience. And so it was
front of the house.
Yeah. And remember somebody jumped off of it.
Oh yeah. All the time.
All the time. Did anyone ever get injured from that or not?
I never saw anybody. The same guy that went with me to see the Killing Is My Business tour, we went to go see Wendell Williams there. And he got tossed in the air and landed and cracked his ankle. So that was Yeah. And then I was on the front row. There's a picture of Mustaine I took.
Yeah.
This is before I was even a real photographer. I was just sneaking my camera in.
Yeah.
And somehow I got pushed onto the stage and was on my back, and I was like, he's going to kick me in the fucking ribs. I just know it. I was able to finagle my way out. And then speaking of there he is.
Yeah.
Just ripping.
Yeah, just totally shredding. Now, it's funny because, okay, so we started playing BC Rich guitars, and then conveniently our drummer, Gar Samuelson, was the general manager of BC Rich, which allowed us to have access to a ton of great guitars, like that bass that I played up in the Cells video with the Fighter Jet artwork, which is now on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Hey, David, your audio is cracking just a little bit.
Oh, it is? Oh, I wonder what's up. How's that? Is that any better?
Yeah.
So Chris is seen here with his Choose Death BC Rich Bitch guitar that he had. Me and Dave, as you can see in those other photos, we had just started using Jackson guitars.
Yep.
And that guitar that Dave has is a King V, which is a model that they made for Robin Crosby, who was nicknamed the King, right? So Dave made that a 24 fret model, so he could play The Skull Beneath the Skin and all those solos and stuff from those days. And then my bass, it's funny, that yellow bass. So we started the tour at a couple, we played, I think, 2 nights. That condom. Fucking thing. You can tell we were okay. There I was for sure probably drinking Guinness ale and and Bass, right? Guinness and Bass. But we'd started the tour, maybe a week or so before that, down in I guess Palm Beach or Miami, and I remember that night for sure I'd had a drink or two, and I had my classic silver Jackson bass with the Dead Kennedy on it. And at the end of the night, I took it and I threw it up in the air like, fuck yeah, you've been awesome, kind of one of those. And then I heard it come smashing down on the stage, and it broke the headstock, like right up here, right up where the Jackson logo is. It broke the headstock. So I had to send it back to Jackson to have them fix it. And I called my friend Lisa Sharkin at Sam Ash Music in New York City the next day quickly. And she sent me that bass. That was the only one they had. And it was in this cracked egg shell yellow. And that's why I had to put these punk rock skater stickers on it, And then I later painted that bass. I had Jackson paint it to kind of a gunmetal gray. I know there's other pictures of me probably during So Far So Good So What, for sure, into Rust in Peace. I'd had that thing painted, and it had a good sound to it. But so maybe that's why it has a condom on it. It was just sort of like
protection.
How do we just not have a yellow eggshell colored bass on stage?
Right.
So it's all I had.
If you look to the left of this picture, there's a set list.
I see that.
Right.
Yeah.
Check this out.
Is that it?
That's it.
That's setting, dude. Awesome.
That's it.
Okay, so what did we play here? That's awesome, man.
Wake Up Dead opening, Conjuring, Bad Omen, straight into Rattlehead, Killing Is My Business. My God, it was insane.
Completely
looking
violent.
down the cross. Yeah, My Last Words, Peace Cells, Boots, Devil's Island, Mechanics, Love to Death, and Black Friday.
Basically, the Kings of Thrash set list now, which is what
we do. Is that what it is?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, that's what we do. We basically touch. We perform. Well, look, when we launched it in 2002, we played in its entirety both "Killing Is My Business" and "So Far So Good So What." Just because those albums, I mean, like Peace Cells and Rust in Peace are always, the acclaimed thrash albums of ours, and I guess rightfully so. But then, like you said, Killing Is My Business, you got to witness some of that. I mean, look, I guess at that point, we played almost every song we had, right? Because if you're headlining and you only have 2 albums out and each album has 8 songs, you're going to basically play every probably Ain't Superstitious was probably the only song we didn't play, but I think we probably played everything else,
Yeah, I don't think that. Yeah, that's definitely not. It's not on this set list, but.
No, I don't. I don't think we ever played it. No, Ain't Superstitious was not a. Our manager Jay Jones recommended we do that, and we did the Jeff Beck version not Willie Dixon, the old Chicago blues guy. He wrote it.
Yeah.
It's his tune. Yeah, but we did more akin to the Jeff Beck version.
Right. So back then, man, you guys were, your DNA is all over the origins of thrash music, right? And Mustaine wanted to one up Metallica. Like when you guys were writing these songs or preparing them and going in the studio, was that a mindset, like collectively, like we got to destroy this band and put our mark on this genre?
You know, I think more Dave, I don't know that was the mindset internally when we were writing the songs. I mean, I think certainly in Dave's heart and in his mind, that was the mission, you know. But, you know, I remember, so Brian Liu, who did Murder in the Front Row, right? He wrote that book and did that movie. He was a friend of Dave's, and he lived in the Bay Area. And so he was basically running our fan club, which basically meant he had a PO box where our mail would go to, right? And our fan mail. And so he sent a letter down one day to us, and this would have been in late summer, you know, of maybe fall of 1983 when we were forming the band. And this fan, he was, you know, gushing on Dave. He goes, "Man, I can't wait to hear your new band. I hope it's faster than Metallica." And dude, that's all it took for the songs. For the songs to, like, that letter was definitely the fuel to the fire. I mean, that set in motion, you know, the world's state-of-the-art speed metal band, if there ever was one. Because that night we went to rehearsal, and all the tempos jumped 10 to 20 beats per minute faster. I mean, significantly. Not let's just nudge it a little, but I mean, like, you know, if like for instance, Skull Beneath the Skin. Probably when we first wrote it was right. It's really groovy and catchy.
Yep.
And you know, by the time after that fan letter showed up, you know, then it's right, and almost unplayable, right? Right to the level where it's literally almost unplayable. And in fact, with Kings of Thrash, you know, that's one of the things we talked about was how great these songs were, really groovy and kind of funky and very hooky. But a lot of that got lost at those fast tempos. And, you know, we didn't have a lot of money to make our records back in those days. So, you know, the production wasn't all glossy and high dollar like the, you know, Motley Crue and Quiet Riot and Rat. You know, these guys were on major labels and they had big budgets. And even, you know, really, you know, Metallica, by the time they did Master of Puppets, you know, to me, some of the greatest drum tone ever on a metal record is Master of Puppets, you know. And even on Kill 'Em All, you know, Metallica slowed their tempos. They pulled things back just a little bit, and it made it a little more listenable. It made it recorded better. It still had the perception of being fast, but it really wasn't as fast. Whereas we just, you know, push the envelope all the way to the edge, you know. So you can thank that one fan for changing the course of the earth.
I'm good with it. Yeah. Yeah. So you definitely, when I hear your bass tone on an album, I know that's David Ellefson. Like you have this really cool, precise tone and feel, and the playability of it just sounds great. Do you think that your full scope of your contributions to Megadeth with your sound have been fully realized? I mean, do you have fans come up and give you these same kind of praises?
Yeah, thank you for that, by the way. Yeah, I mean, look, that is my voice. That is my stamp, you know. I used to sing lead in my bands growing up, and then when I hit puberty and my voice dropped, but my voice, there were just people that were better singers than me. And of course, you know, when I was hitting my early years, you know, Van Halen, you know, the guys were coming out where there was a dedicated front man. You know, I grew up starting, I guess, with Kiss and stuff like this. So both Gene and Paul were singing, and it was kind of the Beatles thing, right? Everybody sang at some point. So me and my friend Greg, we would always kind of be the lead singers and whatever. But, you know, once Van Halen came out, suddenly, okay, that's how you do it. There's one guy that sings, one guy plays bass, one guy plays guitar, another guy's a drummer, and they don't mix. Like everybody's got a defined role. So, and then I copped the Michael Anthony vibe where I would always hit those high harmonies. I really like that, so that kind of became my thing. Play bass, now be that harmony singer. In fact, today I always do it. Any stage I'm on, even if it's just a jam session with guys, I always go to the mic and grab the background vocals,
Oh, cool.
Even the AC/DC thing, right? Malcolm and Cliff, walk up to the mic.
Walking up,
walking in perfect step, highway to hell. And then they walk back, it's so showbiz yet rock and roll, But so I always like that. To me, I always think when people, whoever's on the stage, when they're on a microphone singing, it looks cool, it fills it out, it sounds better, And I say that because I say my voice and my bass playing, but really I think my attitude, all that I am, I think, I feel, who I am, really comes out through my bass playing. It comes out through my fingers, and that's, I guess, a pretty cool gift to have in a lifetime, and like Eddie Van Halen has talked about, he was this shy kid, but man, when he picked up that guitar, this whole other guy came out like this. Everything that Alex talks about it in Alex Van Halen in his memoir. He talks about, man, when Eddie played, that everything that he came out through his guitar, and I think the same could probably be said with my bass playing, that. Right. In Megadeth, very clearly up front, Dave wanted to be the boss. He wanted to be in charge. It was pretty non-negotiable. He's a pretty hard-headed guy in that way. So It's sort of like, well, if you want to be here, this is what it is. And I was like, yeah, I'm good with that. Why not? Look, he was older than me, so out of respect, to pay respect to your elders, if you will, to those older than you. And I played in a lot of bands with older guys growing up. I think I was 12 or 13 years old. I got asked to be in jazz band in school. Everybody's older than me. I got asked to play in a couple of rock and roll bands in the area. These guys, I was, again, 12, 13. These guys were all 16. They were like high school juniors and seniors, so I was like, okay, I'm the new kid in the room, literally, and just, shut up, open your ears, open your eyes, pay attention, and and show up, know my parts, know my songs. So I was disciplined in that from the get-go, you know what I mean? Right. So, there's a respect thing, I think, when you walk into something, and Dave had I had probably maybe more experience than him as far as playing a lot of shows in the Midwest, putting my bands together, doing the promo packs. I was always the guy that talked to the agents. I handled the money. We did the budgets. My dad was a businessman, so he helped me get our van and our trailer, and I bought the sound system. Buddy of mine, we built our lighting system. So I was probably more versed in a lot of those other things, but Dave had those, that year and a half with Metallica, and because that band was on such a uprise, so quickly, you had to respect that he had been on some stages in the real world heading toward the big time that I hadn't had yet. I'd been on a lot of stages and done some stuff in the Midwest, but not to that level. So, I tipped my hat to that and I paid respect to that, I think that could be said. With that said, he took the bull by the horns as being the, primary songwriter. And that's that is an education as well to go, okay, are his songs working? Yes, they are. They seem to be what fans want to hear. Okay, can I write stuff that's competitive with that, that sits in that same lane, that keeps the brand and the bands swinging, to the same fences, and by so far so good, so what, I was, I brought in a lot of material, and then kind of everything after that I did, and I would write songs on my own, bring them in. Lots of times little pieces of them would get used. It wasn't like, we were never a band where someone brought in an entire song, where like, Paul Stanley writes a song, Gene writes a song, Ace writes a song, it was never that kind of a band. We were a group where it was always based on riffs. And as you watch Metallica stuff, Lars, I think pretty clearly came up with that concept that everybody brings riff tapes. We listen to the riffs. We listen to, that's a good riff. That's a good riff. And then we start to kind of put it together. It's sort of this jigsaw puzzle. It was, it's one of those things where you see someone else getting more writing, they're making more money. That is a immediate way to cause dissatisfaction in a band, divisiveness, fights, arguments, hurt feelings, resentments, silence, scorn, all the rest of the stuff.
How early in that writing process did Mustaine or whoever figure out that the the songwriter gets a majority of the funds?
Oh, I think from day one.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I remember very clearly after Gar and Chris got in the band. So this would have been late 1984, maybe early 1985, something like that. Probably around the time we were rehearsing and ready to record "Killing Is My Business," which was December 1984. I remember those two guys having a big blowout fight with, we were at Mars Studio down on Melrose in Vermont.
Oh, yeah.
And we were all pretty buzzed, and they were like, "You told us everything split 4 ways, da da da." And I'm just sitting back going, "Oh shit, like how do I don't even want to be part of this argument, and I just kind of sat back because it was kind of team Dave and team Gar and Chris. So I'm trying to just sort of sit Switzerland somewhere in the middle of this verbal brawl that's happening. And Dave was like, it is split 4 ways, except the publishing, whoever writes the songs. And of course he deemed he was writing the songs. So, it was an unwinnable argument, quite honestly, Now to that end, Dave was pretty gracious to me most of the time, listening to things I brought in, and especially, let's say, during the 90s, right? The Rust in Peace era, right? Bringing things in. Marty didn't bring a lot of stuff in. He was really encouraged by our manager, Bud Prager, on the Cryptic Writings album to start bringing more material in, which he did. He brought, and unfortunately, a lot of the stuff he brought in was sort of melody ideas, but embellishments that maybe didn't garner him songwriting. I mean, we were always of the mindset, you write the words is half of a song, you write the music, it's the other half. Bud Prager had this attitude that there's words, music, and melodies. So like the vocal melody.
Right.
Now, that got to be kind of a gray area. So suddenly it worked to everybody, whoever was writing, it worked to their convenience suddenly, during especially the Risk album.
Right.
Because I saw how much Marty wrote on that. I see how much he's credited for it. And then I also saw his publishing check, which was quite small. And I'd have to think, I never asked Marty, but I would have to think that probably had something to do with his departure, kind of going, yeah, fuck this, I'm out of here,
Right.
And there was a lot of tension at that point. Look, we'd been together for 10 years, Nick's out of the band. There's all these transitions, not just internally, but, music was changing. Marty had other ambitions. And so, I chose as the awesome musician he is, and as my friend, it's like, let the guy go, bless him, let him go, and let's just move on and, try to keep Megadeth intact as we did for the next few years, at least. But, that Risk was probably one of the worst albums for writing, it's, the song Crush 'Em. I mean, I wrote the bass line in the beginning, the whole Crush 'Em was my idea to do that. I didn't get paid for it. I didn't get any credit. And I remember that was an argument. I was just like, yeah, I didn't get fucking credited or paid for it. And so I was kind of like Marty. I was like, what the fuck? It's like we're all bringing ideas in. But quite honestly, Bud Prager had a very big, he had a lot of sway into that whole process that was obviously not favorable. It caused the band to be, kind of fall apart. It produced a record for us that was not so favorable by a lot of our longtime fans. I mean, we all know the story of that record. So, that was one, and Bud's no longer with us. So, I mean, look, again, you let go of all that and you just kind of move on. But yeah, when you think back to it, you kind of go, well, how do we not repeat that again? You know what I mean?
Right.
And so, I think probably to answer your question a little more pointedly, was everything that I wanted to do inside of Megadeth expressed? No, of course not. I don't think it is for anybody unless it's your band, your name's on the door, and you write everything. Bruce Springsteen, the East Street Band. Guess what? Bruce Springsteen gets to do pretty much whatever he wants. Tells the band what to do. Prince, and the New
God.
Revolution. Guess what? Prince gets to do what he wants. And ultimately, that's where Megadeth ended up. It's where it is now,
Yeah.
And it certainly was when it was put back together in 2005. It was clearly not going to be a group anymore. It was one man in his way. So, so again, you can fight that, or you just sort of get out of the way of that, So I think
remember,
for me,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that for me, I think in these last 20, probably since you and I have reconnected in the last 25 years, post Megadeth, some of it, a lot of it, I've gotten to do a lot of other stuff. And for me, the success and the reward isn't in, gold records, because hardly anybody gets those anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's more about starting something and seeing it through to the end. You know what I mean? Like, you saw me with F5, you've seen me with various things, getting in the room with the guys. Temple of Brutality. Yeah, we get in the room, have a great time with your friends. Look, the first record's always fun because, there are no publishing arguments. There are no, you haven't slept on floors and tour buses and airplane. You haven't done the grind yet, right? So the album one is always fun. It's like the first date, everything's awesome. And then album two is kind of like, all right, now you kind of know where the bombs are and you kind of know how things work. And then, I think I really do agree that album three is kind of the make or break. If you can get to album three, you've kind of broke on through to the other side, And then I think at that point, you've kind of agreed, like, all right, it is what it is, and this is how it's going to be. And you just sort of get on with it, And, back when, peace sells, killing us my business, these were days when we were obviously very young. Music business was very different. We had these 7-album contracts with our record labels. There was plenty of horizon to develop your career. And, and that was what it was designed to do. Today things pop up. I get on board, or I help start them. I start them myself, whatever. You do them, you write them, you record them, you put them out. And then, look, if they stick, maybe you do another one. If they don't, you move on to something else. It's not about, this is the hill I'm going to die on forever. This back here was the hill I was willing to die on, and kind of did, to be honest with you. That's where I staked my claim. It'll forever be my legacy. So now the stuff I do is it's more about just enjoying the process and knowing that phase of my life is behind me now, and it'll always be part of my story. I can kind of get to pick and choose the fun stuff I want to do now.
Yeah. So we were just talking about Risk a few minutes ago, and that album was where we first actually met face to face.
Right.
It was at the, what was it called? The Georgia Dome, part of the
Georgia Dome. Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah. Do you have your photo there? Your Goldberg photo?
That one?
There it is.
The one that got me in so much trouble with Mustaine.
Look at those abs. They're not ours. But so that's wrestler Goldberg. Yeah. So really, which is who we wrote the song Crush 'Em for. We wrote it for him. This was an era where songs like ours and Metallica and Pantera, they were getting used at hockey games, and WCW, which I thought was kind of the hipper, cooler, kind of new wrestling league, if you will, right? Yep. Goldberg was the icon. He was the big superstar. He loved Megadeth. So we wrote Crush 'Em for him as his walkout song when he came out to the ring. And we got invited, that picture there, to the Georgia Dome for a big was it WrestleMania or what did they call it?
It was a big WrestleMania thing. I think you guys were on Capitol Records at the time.
We were, yep. That was our last album for Capitol. Yeah.
So I got a call from somebody in the promotions department, publicity team, were like, "Hey, you're in Atlanta. We need a photo shoot with Goldberg and the band, for press for this movie that's coming out, Universal Soldier."
Yeah.
I was like, "Fuck yeah! I love Megadeth. I'm gonna get to do a photo shoot with Megadeth and go sign me up." So I show up, we do the shoot. Right after this, Mustaine takes me to the side. He goes, "Yeah, I need to approve every one of these photos. This guy doesn't have a shirt on. I don't know what people are going to think." And I clearly told him right there, I was like, listen, have your publicity team at the label show you the photos, because I have to FedEx they were on slides, right?
Right.
So it wasn't like going to Walmart and 1 hour photo, turn it around.
Or digital or anything. Yeah.
Or
yeah.
digital. This was before the digital age. So I sent them off, and then you guys played the Tabernacle in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
With Double Drive opening. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I do remember them. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm backstage, and we're eating in the catering room. It's me, you, Dave. There was a hockey player, Mike Stapleton. He was there.
Yeah.
And
I think lived right down the street from me here at that time. I think he was.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, he played for Phoenix at the time, but he was he played for the Thrashers too, for the Atlanta Thrashers.
Oh, okay.
So he was there, and then Dale Torborg, the Demon. Remember him?
I don't.
He was a wrestler too, dressed up like Gene Simmons.
Oh, okay. Yes.
That guy. Yes. So we're all backstage or whatever.
He was an Atlanta guy, right? Was he there?
Yeah. So Mustaine's like, after we eat, he goes, I need to talk to you for a minute. I was like, oh shit. Well, he sounds angry.
There it goes.
So he takes me to the dressing room and just fucking laces me up and down. He goes, I told you that picture's out there now. I look like a fool. I'm standing next to this guy with no shirt. And again, I state my claim. I'm like, look, man, I'm working for the label, not you, in a nice way. I didn't say it like in a dick mood.
Of course.
But I don't think he's ever forgiven me.
So you got to have one of those. That's how the publishing arguments used to go.
Yeah, I got scolded like
you got scolded. Meanwhile, you're standing with the most famous wrestler of the time. Having just done a John. I remember when we shot the video for Risk. We shot it at this power plant down in Long Beach, California. Yeah. And then Jean-Claude Van Damme, who was the star of the movie, he came in and shot his bits afterwards.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, it's like that was big time shit, man. I mean,
it was.
We're there with on the biggest wrestling events of the year, and
you're playing in front of 100,000 people at a stadium dome
and on TV. I mean, I remember my family at home watching it on TV. My son Roman, was like, I don't know, a year old or whatever, a couple years old. That was a big deal even for him. 2 or maybe he's 3 or something. But it was like that was big time stuff.
God, man.
Yeah. But how dare you take that picture?
You know what? I got paid. It did really well. It got put in People magazine, Metal Edge, Hit Parader, all those magazines. So it was.
Well, it's funny because at the last song at the end of the night, we took our shirts off. So I don't know what the big deal is. Anarchy in the UK it was mandated.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, take your shirt off.
Oh my God. Now it's like everybody has man tits, and it's like, don't.
Yeah, right, exactly. Oh, you reach a certain age, and a guy on stage with your shirt off, it's like, oh, dude, what are you doing? It's like, the drunk guy at the barbecue at the family reunion. It's like, put your shirt back on. Yeah.
Speaking of Dave, man, there's a lot of mythology about this guy, about his attitude, his vitality. Him lashing at people like he did me, and I'm sure the guys over the publishing. How do you maintain all those years of working with him? I mean.
Well, as you know, you keep your head down, Marty Friedman would always have these great Japanese colloquialisms, and I remember one time he said that the nail that sticks up gets hammered, right? Meaning keep your head down, right? And that was one of, it's kind of along the line of, the squeaky wheel gets oiled, gets the oil, these kind of things, right? So the head that sticks up gets hammered. Keep your head down. And I mean, look, it was not always fun. It was not always friendly, and it certainly wasn't easy,
right.
And so
it's funny because I was having dinner with Kerry King and his wife a couple of months ago in New York, and he mentioned, briefly his little 5 shows or whatever he did with Megadeth, but he's like, this would have never worked out.
No,
he and I would just have butted heads, like we're too alpha,
Yeah, well, I think that's what it is, look, for whatever reason, me shows up in Hollywood, Minnesota nice, as they call it, and you've seen my mom in our Megadeth Behind the Music, right? So, I was raised by a good mom and dad, and, To some point, it's sort of like, look, you want to play bass, you want to be a rock star, you want to be in a band. Well, here's one way to do it, And the truth of it is, I loved the music, I really did, and I saw what Dave was writing was like, this is great. I mean, this doesn't sound like Shout at the Devil. This doesn't sound like, Rock You Like a Hurricane. This isn't like the stuff that was happening right out our door on the Sunset Strip and on MTV, at that day. This was some other, dark, demonic, fucking channel that we were tuned into, or that he was tuned into, or whatever. And I loved it. It was great, And so, so that for me is what kept me there, was the music was great. I knew it was going to be successful, but it was not going to be easy. And, it was my friend Greg Handovid. So we moved to Hollywood together, and we both knocked on Dave's door to, ask him where to buy beer and cigarettes. And, that sort of got us in the door, if you will. Not, we didn't know who he was. I mean, we had never heard of Metallica. We didn't know who Dave was. So, we sat down over, beer and bullshitted, the night away. And that's when we learned about all that. And the next morning, that night, actually, when we went back to our apartment downstairs, Greg was like, dude, we got to go play with that guy. I said, I know. That's something real, that's right. A real thing. And so that's what started it. Greg had essentially started playing with Dave. There was a couple of people kicking around. He was trying to show this kid, Matt, how to play bass. And Matt was a cool guy. But, a young guy from Beverly Hills, he was not, in the sort of in the mindset of what it really is to go be a rock star, and that just wasn't his place. He got into business and was very successful in that later, which was his calling. And, who knows what Dave would have done had me and Greg not knocked on his door,
Right.
Because putting something together is more than just some songs. It's about having, in Dave's case, some soldiers and wingmen who were willing to fucking be in it together. That was a band where when the chips were down, it was a lot of we and us. And then when the publishing came in and the checks came in, it became a lot of me and mine,
Yeah, I was going to say, we sounds like a lot of people.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Right?
And it was always like that, and in fact, it's funny because after all those years, I sat right in this very room, this office in my house. And in 2015, Sean Drover and Chris Broderick had moved on.
Yep.
And Chris Adler was ready to play drums for us on this next album, which would become Dystopia. We didn't have a guitar player again. So it was kind of a three-piece. It was me, Dave, and Chris Adler as a guest at that time. And I sat here and I said to Dave, I said, it's ironic. In fact, maybe even he said it. I forgot. But we had the conversation right here. He goes, it's ironic that it's just the two of us again, rebuilding Megadeth. Just like it was in the beginning, just like it had been so many times. It was just me and him,
Right.
And, we each had a role, so which is why I don't resent Dave. And, he had a role as being a charismatic songwriter and storyteller. I mean, look, I can write songs too. And, I tell stories, for whatever reasons, the one that he was writing back in that day, right after Metallica, had enough, magic to it that it caught the ears of the Metallica fans. And that's what got us on the ride, and, because look, let's face it, to some degree, we all just got sucked into Metallica's success, and we're all just a branch off the Metallica family tree, if you want to be honest about it, right? And that's my story too. That's why I'm always so grateful for those guys. And so to be able to have that moment in time where that happened, and we could build our success from there, and by Peace Cells, we were out on our own. We stood on our own as a group.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why, Lars and, always loved Megadeth to some degree, because he liked David. He's a fan of his work. They were friends. It was unfortunate they had to part ways, but he would come to our shows. We'd hang out. We'd get drunk after the show and get silly and goof off and stuff, and that's why we've all remained friends for so many years, right? Because it didn't have to, and it didn't have to be bitter like that. And of course, I didn't have a horse in that race. I was just, the new guy on the block here. But yeah, it is interesting that over and over again, it always came back to me and Dave, because we both served different roles. I had the ability, I'm like the putter together of things, right? Even with Megadeth, Dave's songs and his personality, who knows what he would have done after Metallica if Greg Handevitt and I hadn't knocked on his door that night and asked him where to buy beer and cigarettes. Who knows if anything would have happened for him again, but I know together as a team, we were a force to be reckoned with, and we fought through some pretty unbelievable circumstances and poverty and destitute and some pretty horrible circumstances together that we were able to do together. I wouldn't have been able to do it on my own, and who knows if he would have, I don't think so. So together it took our teamwork to make it happen. And we would always come back to that. I mean, again, so far so good. So what? Third album, It's me and Dave with our new drummer, Chuck, who was our drum tech, now drummer, going in, writing the songs. And then it happened again with Rust in Peace. Now with
who was the guitar player in that? That was Jeff.
That was Jeff Young. Yeah. And Jeff came in very late in the session. He was not in the band, really. He was brought in by Jay Reynolds to play some solos that he would then go later learn. And because Jay was going to be the guitar player. And then we just quickly realized, okay, this is not a workable path. We may as well get Jeff in the band because Jeff's a great player. And he just fucking knocked it out of the park with his guitar work on that record. So he really stepped in big time on that record and made that happen. He did a lot. I didn't know. I know now working with him in Kings of Thrash, I didn't realize that he had actually played on every single song on that record. I think except there was only one, Into the Lungs of Hell or something. There's only one song that he didn't play on, but he played on everything else. He played all the acoustic guitars, which would have also, I guess, been Into the Lungs of Hell. So yeah, he played all the acoustics. He did a lot of guitar work on that record. So I was unaware of that. I thought he just played 4 solos, but it turns out he played on everything. So
I was looking through my ticket stubs the other day. I just recently moved here to Oklahoma now, and as you can see behind me, there's a bunch of memorabilia shit.
Yeah.
But I was looking through all my ticket stubs and stuff, and I found the ticket stub to that tour. You guys played a place called Center Stage Theater in Atlanta.
Oh, I remember that. Yes, I remember very clearly. Yeah.
Who was it with? It was with Sanctuary or Warlock, or is it the same band? Or
and it was kind of in the round or something.
Yeah.
I remember, because that was right when Doc McGee started managing us, and his partner Doug Thaler came out to that show to see us, and then it was right after that we had brought them on to be our manager. Unfortunately, we were on drugs and we couldn't get clean, and all of Doc's other clients like Motley and everybody, they were all getting clean. So
oh my God,
wrong entry point. You know what I mean? So we didn't make the cut there, but. Tell you what, I learned a lot from those guys in those, few months we were with them, and then ultimately that turned the corner to Rust in Peace and all was well. But I remember that gig very clearly. In fact, it's funny. I'm just getting my ear in here. Me and Jeff Young talk about that show quite a bit. He brings that show up a lot. So what was it called?
Center Stage Theater.
Center Stage Theater, right? I'll have to tell him that because we talk about that show a lot. We remembered the gig, just couldn't remember what it was called.
Yep. That was it. Then they changed it to Earthlink Live, but I saw Ace Frehley there as soon as he, his solo record, and Accept, Wasp, it
was this cool kind of mid-size venue. It wasn't quite the big arena, but it was certainly bigger than the theaters and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
It's bigger than the Metroplex, where we started the interview.
Oh my God, man. That place. It burned to the ground. I think some homeless people lit a fire, tried to get and it caught on fire. I was like, fuck, man. So many shows I saw there, man.
It's so funny because I out of all the venues from back in that day, really none of them are around anymore. And it's weird. Hollywood has the Whiskey, which now has kind of become a home for Kings of Thrash, right? We've played a lot there. We did a live album there and a DVD and everything. But most of these venues that we played back then, and the Whiskey was not one of them. When I met Dave, he said, "Yeah, we're not playing any gigs in LA." I was like, "What?" So the Country Club was a staple, but that's gone. All those venues from San Francisco, like the Stone, Ruthie's, the Berkeley Keystone, none of those venues are around. So I think really one of the only ones is the Metro in Chicago. I think that's one of the only venues, like Fender's Ballroom in Long Beach burned down. I mean, all of these venues are gone.
Dude, it's funny because like I found some pictures of Megadeth that I took at the Roseland Ballroom. It was one of the CMJ fests or whatever they were called back in the day.
Yeah, College Music Journal. Yeah, which was like an industry trade magazine. They'd have an annual convention in New York City.
Yeah, so I have pictures of Mustaine. It was a photo of Mustaine that I took with Bruce Dickinson and Peter Steele, and I posted it. It got like 40,000 views. I was like, wow, this is crazy, man. But legendary time, like got some great photos. That's when I was first really getting into shooting for Metal Legend stuff. And my dear friend that was working at Roadrunner, two of them, Maria Gonzalez and Jamie Roberts, invited me to that show. That was my first time in New York.
Wow.
And I was like, dude, this is insane, But
what year would that have been? That would have been
like 98. Yeah,
probably Cryptic Writings. Yeah, I remember playing the Roseland Ballroom.
Yeah,
it was an old ballroom, but man, in fact, I remember seeing Down there.
Oh yeah,
and I remember Phil Anselmo was not himself, let's just say. And I remember I think he passed out on the drum riser or something, right? He was
probably
he got real comfortable up there, but it was funny. It was one of these a different day, but it's funny. That venue has had some legendary shows there, we would play there. The place would be packed. It was right in kind of Midtown,
right there.
And then even when I started working for Peavey, and you and I were hanging a lot, working together, I remember going and seeing bands play there. In fact, I think I played there at the just on my own. It was an event. Maybe you were there in New York City. It was Les Paul. It was his 90th birthday, and a Guitar Player magazine and Bass Player magazine united. They came together and did an event.
You know what? It's funny you say that. I wasn't at that event, but this is another strange coincidence between the two of us. I was in New York then, but I wasn't able to attend because I was doing a video shoot with Skid Row.
Wow, really?
We bumped into each other in Times Square, like literally walking across. I was going to.
I remember that. Yeah, because that's where the event was at the Crown Plaza. Yeah, that's that's funny when you run into someone like that in New York City. You're like, whoa!
What are the chances? And I think you came to the show after you were done with your thing, and we're back. Like Mike Piazza was backstage. It was at the old Hard Rock in Times Square. And then,
God, what a memory. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then another time that we just randomly bumped into each other was in New Zealand at the hotel. We were checking in.
Yes. Yeah. Because you were down there with Five Finger Death Punch. Yeah. Well, we were going to go play. Yeah. We were going to play Soundwave. And I remember Dave and AJ the promoter got into a big fight on Twitter.
Yep.
And we ended up not going. Thank God, because I think that was the year a lot of bands didn't get paid. It's, so here, to Dave's, credit, he did have instincts about things that were often correct. Like we were going to go to Australia. Excuse me. We're going to do, I think it was India, Australia, and then India, New Zealand, Australia, whatever it was. And all of a sudden we go, in India, which is a pain in the ass halfway around the world. And then we played New Zealand, but you guys were all going over to play Soundwave, and we went home.
Yeah, we did one gig in New Zealand.
Hang out.
Yeah, we did one gig in New Zealand. You guys did play New Zealand because I went to the show, and then I think you guys split right after that. And then another oddball run-in with you was when I was working with Stained, I think. Yeah, it was Stained. And we were on the ferry on the way to Download Festival, and I'm going
Right.
up the stairs of the boat, and you're like, friend, and I turn around, I'm like, what do you? And I think you were Tim Ripper Owens, Chris Caffery, and
Yes.
Simon the drummer. What was his name? The
Simon
drummer?
Wright.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we were doing a Tim Ripper Owens tour
Yep.
in Europe. Wendy Deal put us on some dates with Heaven and Hell.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that's right. We were all going to Download.
Yep.
We opened Download. We were like a main stage, but we were like the 11 a.m. act.
Sure.
You know? And
yeah, I remember I snapped a photo of you guys together as a group that I got to find.
Funny.
Yeah, because Tim Ripper loves that photo. He goes, dude, that's probably one of the best photos we've ever taken. But I remember you were telling me on the ferry ride over that is where you kind of went into rehab back in the day.
From Download, it was called Castle Donington Monsters of Rock back then. Yeah, so every time, I played the show. It was August '88. Back to LA, went to rehab. It was about a year and a half later I finally got clean. But yeah, so every time I played Download, I always had this tremendous gratitude just to be able to be back on that stage again. You know, because a lot of people, drugs and booze flick you out of our business and never to be heard from again. You know,
exactly.
And for me and Megadeth to be able to recover from that and be able to be back there playing was really remarkable. You know, and it was funny because backstage that day, the agent, John Jackson, came to me. He was really excited to see me as he used to book Megadeth back in the day. So it was actually backstage at Donington with Ripper. Metallica's agent, John Jackson, who had booked Megadeth over the years, comes up to me, gives me a big hug. We've been friends for a long time. And he starts telling me about the Big Four. And I said, really? He goes, yeah, I'm flying over to see Slayer and Megadeth this week, Canadian Carnage, to talk to them about it. James and Lars are in. And I said, interesting. I said, well, it's funny because right before I came over here, me and Dave had been texting. We've been chatting. I said, I might be back in Megadeth by then. So it was kind of funny that so that would have been what, August, maybe August or September, August probably of or whenever it was, summertime, August, whatever, of 2009.
Yeah.
And then we had a couple little kind of near misses of me coming back, and then finally it worked out for me to come back, and I was back in pocket there by March of 2010. And
what was that like, man? After night, is it like getting back with an old girlfriend where the sex is good for the first couple of weeks and then I get it, right?
Fair question. No, fair question. So look, I had known that this conversation had been coming around for about 6 months, in fact, just 2010, I'm at NAMM, Willie G, Dave's Tech hits me.
Yeah.
Asked me if I could come over to the Dean guitar party and jump up on stage and play a song with Dave. I said, no problem. Then he hit me back. He said, no, I guess we got it covered. No worries. Be in touch. Right. So a couple weeks later, after they've announced the Rust in Peace 20th anniversary tour, Big Four has now been announced. Mike Portnoy and I we're doing Hail together, right? We were in New York City. We were going up to see Eddie Trunk and do an interview, and and he says, he goes, man, you really need to be there for that. That's not cool. You need to be there for those. I said, I know. And then I get home from that trip, and it's my son's birthday. It's February 2nd, and my BlackBerry was in the office here, and it was beeping, and I look at it, and really gee, and they're like, dude, please call us, please. We really need you to come back and do this tour coming up. There's no one else who could possibly do this. And I said, all right. So me and Dave, basically Sean arranges for me and Dave to get on the phone. Everything was just fine. He says, this is what it is. This is what I can pay you. This is what it is. I said, dude, whatever. I said, I'll be over tomorrow. I'll throw a bass in my car. I'll drive over to San Diego. We got in a room. I plugged in. We counted off Symphony of Destruction. It was just right out of the gate, because you know me. You've seen clinics. I stay up on all the material. I can play all the stuff. So it just fell right into place, and it was just kind of like it was just a no-brainer, right? So then all the rest of it was easy, and then it was more about, okay, well, let's order some basses, order some cabinets, make sure the stretch jeans look right. Let's go.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And this is why it's important, I think, for anybody, keep your act together, keep your chops together, keep your look together, keep your act together, because you just never know when the call for something is going to come, and it'll be random. It'll be unexpected. It'll be out of the blue, and you need to be ready, So, I think that's the lesson with it. So then from there, it was easy. It was just kind of like, okay, done, Now, as you know, I was working at Peavey at the time.
Yep.
But Peavey was going through a lot of changes, some downsizing, overseas manufacturing in China, all this shit you hear about now in the press. I watched it happen. I watched America get sold. We gave away our country to China because they could make it cheaper than us. It's just that
way
simple.
Cheaper. Yeah.
Even Hartley Peavey, who, had such this empire, and I learned a lot from him. He was a great boss, a great icon to work for in that side of the business. And I just remember he was just beside himself. He couldn't compete, even making stuff in little old Mississippi. Just, everything went to China, and so, that's a whole other conversation. But watching it happen, and then now seeing where we are now. But so, and eventually by 2010, he was, had to make some changes internally. So it was good actually that I went back to Megadeth. I was able to let go of the Peavey job, and it literally happened on the same day. It was perfect. It was kind of a perfect, divine alignment. Going, okay, well, this was meant to be, and so then we carried on, for another. I agreed. I said, look, I'll come back for a month. Let me just get through this tour. We'll see how it goes. And it went well. And again, I'd been there as an owner of the company. I was no longer an owner at this point. I was just a hired sideman musician, which quite honestly, at that point, I was okay with,
Right.
I was kind of like, well, as much as the owner also can get a lot of the perks, I know the owner of the business gets paid last, and if things fuck up or a show cancels or anything happens, guess what? Now you're on the hook for all the bills too. And that happened a lot over the years. So I was like, let me just try. Let me keep it simple, keep it easy, and as we went around the world, it was great. I think everybody, with the Big Four, it was cool because I was back in Megadeth. Joey Belladonna was back in Anthrax.
Right.
Dave Lombardo was back in Slayer. It was kind of, everybody was back home, and the excitement for each of our bands, as well as all of our bands together, was huge, and it was
the camaraderie there with all those other artists, or was it kind of like, well, I'm going to show up, do my gig, and we're off to the next city? Or
no, not at all. Not at all. Metallica were very gracious to us to even do it, and, they agreed to do it because they wanted to, and I think it was good for them too. They were kind of coming out of a weird phase of their own career. And I think for them to sort of reestablish that, look, we are the great Metallica, the originator of thrash, and to go back to the origin story, I think was good for them too. I mean, it put them back in stadiums, and which they haven't left the stadium since. You know what I mean?
No, they have not.
And that's all they do now. So I think for them it was a great corner to turn. And together we did it, and it brought everybody, all the other bands back, in glory. I mean, look at how big the Slayer legacy is now. It's huge, huge, right? So it's amazing. It really was bode well for them as well. And look, for Megadeth, we got another 10 years, 11 years out of it. Won a Grammy.
Yep.
So I feel like a lot of our story together in Megadeth with me and Dave got to be completed as well, and if that means we never play together again, oh, well, it was a good couple of chapters. And if one day we do, well, then we'll see where that goes. But, I think you don't sit around and wait for those things. You just get on with it. You just get moving forward. And, I certainly didn't stop. I just kept going, and
you did. You're busier now than you ever have been.
Yeah. And I feel lighter, to be honest with you. I wake up and every day is a day like, all right, what are we going to do today? You know what I mean? And it's,
when you shed that dead skin off of you, that's just hampering on you. It makes a difference, man. There's many situations I got myself out of.
Yeah.
But I was just like, well, the perks are too good. No, they're not. my sanity and my health are way more important than whatever this other person or entity could provide me, you know.
It's nice to be out of the golden handcuffs, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Because, you know,
Perfect. Yeah.
because
So let
it
me
is.
ask you that.
Go ahead.
Let me ask you this: have you spoken with Mustaine since the incident?
Nope.
Not one word.
Not one word. No need to. You know, it's
No,
like,
I mean, yeah.
After that, all right. No, I don't need to be your friend. I'll move on. You know what I mean?
As far as
So,
those records go, you know, they've all grown up. They've gone to college.
Yeah.
They're there forever.
Exactly. Yeah.
Everybody can listen to them and get off on it, which I still do. You know,
well, look,
and it's cool because you got
songs,
these.
The songs are there. Not I didn't mean to interrupt you, but the songs are there. The music's there. You know, and you know, just because. Look, the ending of that friendship was a long time in the making. It's really started in 2018, where I, you know, again, excuse me, where I said, you know, you kind of, you know, keep the nail gets hammered.
Yep.
Kind of stayed down. By 2018, I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'm not okay with this now. You know, there was some stuff that I was just, and I was vocal about it. I stood up for what I felt to be the right thing. And of course, that was not well received.
Was that the lawsuit? Is that what you're talking about?
No. It had nothing to do with that. I mean, there was a couple financial things from that we got squared away after the fact, which is good.
Yeah.
But more just about, you know, writing the new album, the next album that took 5 years to make. And, you know, and every time I would try to write and put something on it, it would get taken off. And, you know, it seemed very personal, you know, and at some point it's just kind of like, look, dude, you know,
what are we doing here?
Yeah, if you don't want me here, fuck, I'll move on. You know what I mean? So I guess it took what it took, and what happened, and then that was the moment to just sort of abolish it and make it all go away. And you know, that's why, you know, the first time out the door there was legal stuff because we were legally, you know, bound into, you know, we were owners of a business and a corporation, so that's not uncommon. You know, to have that. And a lot of that was just so that I could get paid direct from all the sources, you know, so that my money wouldn't keep flowing through Megadeth. It would just, I get paid directly from Capitol and Warner Brothers and everybody. So it was worth going through that process, as shitty as it is. But because we settled it, and, you know, it did allow at a later day for me to come back and, you know, go through all that again. And again, that's why I didn't fight my way out the door, and I didn't talk a bunch of smack, and it's just kind of like, all right, well, you know, look, if we can't get along, just move on, you know, and you know, it's, you know, and I'm the guy that I don't close doors. I don't slam it in people's fuck you. That's it. And you'll never work in this town again, you know, because it's just, you're mad in the moment. That's all it is. Just move on. You know what I mean? Just keep moving on, because I didn't see coming back to Megadeth in 2010. And suddenly there it was in the front view, and it worked out great. It was glorious. It was huge. We accomplished a lot of great stuff together. But like I said, you know, that group is not about, you know, being it, you know, people always talk about the 90s, the Rust in Peace era, where we were very much a group. You know, it was very much a group. We worked together, we fought together, we won together, we scaled the mountains and won the battle together. You know, it's not that anymore. You know what I mean? It's the Dave show, and that's the way they want it. And look, as you can see, I've got a lot of other things I want to say in my life, and a lot of other things I want to do in my life. And I always try to kind of angle it so that it speaks well back into Megadeth. You know what I mean? Rather than oppose it. Like, why oppose what I've done? It's like, that's like shitting on my own work. So it's like, hold that up in high regard, high esteem, because it is. We really did some great stuff together, and then just kind of move on from it, you know? So, you know, that way you're not, you know, tarnishing your own past and your own work. And, you know, it's like, why fight with yourself? You know?
Yeah, totally. Let me hypothetically saying, and you guys rightfully deserve this recognition. You guys get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Priest brought back KK Downing. You know, Blondie tried to bring her original band, except for you know, a couple of people. What is that going to look like?
Well, look, you know, the truth is, I didn't do anything. So it's like, why wouldn't I? You know what I mean? It's like, I you know, I was the one flicked out the door. You know what I mean? So it's I mean, look, the way that works with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is, as I understand, is if you're a recorded member, you're automatically brought back to be honored in that. And obviously I'm a recorded member, you know. There would be quite a few of us probably standing on that stage, right? There's a lot of us, I don't know, 20, 25 people be standing up there, you know. Well, it's interesting. Remember when Guns N' Roses got inducted and Axl, you know, everybody said, yeah, I'm coming. And then Axl didn't show up, you know. So you'd like to think it wouldn't be like that. And it's nice to see those guys all mended fences and everything. Look at how big that is and how cool that is now. You know what I mean? So, you know, you'd like to think that, yeah, if that call would come, everybody, you know, would I accept the call? Of course I would. Would I go? Of course you would. You get invited to a party, you go, you know? And especially when it's a party in your honor, which ultimately that would be, you know? So I think those are the things where you're being honored by somebody else, you know, and to not go would be to spit in their face. So why would you do that? You know, so you go, and you be part of it. And again, that's why I think the moving on rather than fighting your way out the door is always the better approach, because, you know, life is short. And as we get now to this phase of our life, it goes quicker. And there's a little less track for the train now, you know. So
let me tell you something, man. The older I get, the more I start thinking about my mortality. Like, the doctor fucked up and gave me a higher dose blood pressure pill last month. Yeah. I blacked out in my living room, scared the shit out of me. I thought I had a heart attack. I'm like, I woke up, I'm like, what am I doing on the floor? How long have I been out? I had no idea. Go to the emergency, and I'm like, is this what it's come to now? I'm not even 60 yet. Like, terrified. I'm still scared. Like, you know, you're walking around, any little weird feeling, you know what I mean? Are you a hypochondriac?
I totally feel you, man. And it's, you know, it is what it is. As you get older, something hurts in your body and it just keeps hurting until you go to the doctor and deal with it. You know what I mean? And you realize, oh my God, this is what my parents and my grandparents did. They went to the doctor and there's a bunch of pill bottles in the cabinet, you know, for your blood work, your cholesterol, this. And you're right. And you realize, I mean, look, most of us would be dead from the common cold by 14. You know what I mean? And some of us would have made to 30 and, you know, probably dead by 40, you know. And I remember an eye doctor told me that. I said, we talk about eyes. He goes, you know, your eyes really, they're kind of good until kind of your late 30s, and then they wear out. It's what it is, you know. And it is kind of, most of us should be dead by 40. So the fact that any of us are here, we're just here on borrowed time, you know. And you know, look, if you can't get along with someone because you disagree, well, then move on rather than, you know, fight an unwinnable war over something. It's like why? You know, resentment is the quickest way to kill yourself. You know, it's the old, you know, I drink the poison and hope you die because I'm resentful at you, you know. So it's like, you know, why do anything to harm me and you? And it's just, you know, I don't know, that's just for me, you know, that's just my, I guess, some age-old wisdoms I've learned in my life is, you know, travel light, you know, and it's, you know, travel light and enjoy the journey at this point.
Yeah. Real quick, we're going to have to let you go. I know you got to get going, but we got to talk about Kings of Thrash for a minute, man.
Sure. Yeah.
What a great idea. Number one.
Thank you.
And the fact that you brought back some of the legacy guys. I think Chris Poland plays every once in a while. Then Jeff Young is there. Yeah. Who else anybody else that you can bring in to?
Well, I brought Chuck Beeler up when we played in Flint, Michigan, at the Machine Shop. I brought Chuck up. His health is not great, but he was able to jump up, play In My Darkest Hour and maybe Anarchy or something. I don't know. We played a couple songs together. So that was really fun to do. And that was the point of it. It was to go honor these songs. You know, and here again, uplifting the legacy, you know what I mean? Rather than talking bad about it, hating everyone, screw them, they screwed me, and fuck all that, you know? It's like, you know what? These songs, and I know from being on the inside of Megadeth, these songs are not going to get played again. You know, they're just not. And, you know, we found a great voice with Chaz, our singer, who actually has a Megadeth tribute band, and I'd actually played with him when I did a book signing. When I went around, I did the More Life with Death, which was like kind of a follow up to my memoir, My Life with Death. We were at Warwick's down in La Jolla, the bookstore, and out on the sidewalk, they hired a Megadeth tribute band to stand out on the sidewalk and play Megadeth songs while I'm inside signing.
God.
So I went out there. And I said to the bass player, I said, hey, can I play the bass for a minute? So I jumped in and we jammed a few songs. And dude, it was like, it was like that Where the Streets Have No Name U2 video. Remember, they're up on the top of the building and there's all these people out. And it was just like that in La Jolla. There's like 1,000 people or whatever out in the streets, all rocking out while we're playing Megadeth songs. And this is when I was in Megadeth at the time. And Chaz is the singer of that band. They're called Woke Up Dead. And so the irony that years later we would be reconnected unknowingly and just back on stage at the Whiskey to do this ultimate jam night tribute to the Big Four that Jeff and I participated in. And that's, I'd had the idea for Kings of Thrash because I really wanted to go back out and play Killing Is My Business. And I'd contacted Chris Poland about going out playing Killing and P-Cells. And then when it worked out with me and Jeff, it was like Jeff and I became, the anchors, and then Chris was able to come in and out as a guest because Chris is busy with other stuff. But he's, he loves being there. He's there whenever we can have him. So he'll, he's in there. Our new song Lockdown that we did, because we'd written some,
by the way.
Thank you. Yeah. We'd written some songs and, we wanted to finally just, put out a couple of our own things. We had a song called Bridges Burned that's out on, we just performed it live. We never recorded it for real in the studio. Lockdown, we thought, okay, let's get serious now in 2025. We got some shows coming up here this fall. Let's put a song out. So, now they got everybody excited to keep writing some more material again too. So we've got some of our own songs as well as while we honor the, these deep cuts, Megadeth legacy records. We played some stuff by Riot and Thin Lizzy and some of the heroes that inspired us as well. So
totally.
Because they may not be thrash, but they're certainly kings. They're kings of another genre. So
are you noticing younger kids showing up to these shows like their parents bringing? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, when we played the Whiskey, for instance, when we recorded the Best of the West, that was only our 4th show. We put together this little run of dates, Brick by Brick in San Diego. We played here in Phoenix. We did Vegas, and then we did the Whiskey and sold out the Whiskey. Dude, that place has never been so freaking violently moshed as it was that night. And in fact, people were going, dude, I have never seen the Whiskey like this. I mean, just full on thrashing, stage diving, full on just old school, like at the Metroplex, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it was full on. And a lot of our shows are like that. It's great. We go to Australia, same thing, man. Full on just stage diving and crowd surfing. And
now, do you prefer a smaller, sweaty club like that over an arena or a bigger theater?
Well, it depends. Okay, so here's
not
the thing.
For ego. Not for ego, but for like Jesus Christ.
So those songs were written when the band was at that phase, right? The Metroplex, the Stone, these size venues. So with Kings of Thrash going out and playing those size venues, it's kind of what it's meant to be. It's the era, it's the right size, it's the right attitude. It's where just sort of the vivacity, the vitality of the whole thing just works. Right. It's where it really works the best there. So, and then look, as Megadeth moved on and we were playing Symphony of Destruction and Anger Again and those bigger songs, look, those worked very well in the stadiums and the arenas. That stuff sort of broadcasts out better, to a mainstream audience. But this stuff we're doing with Kings of Thrash, it really does work better in these smaller venues. So it's the right place for it for sure.
Does Mustaine, has he ever chimed in about this project at all that you've heard?
No, I only saw him say one thing, and he spoke favorably about it. I mean, look, good. He gets paid. I mean, look, when we played those songs, he gets paid. You know what I mean? So it's, we when you play a song live, BMI ASCAP, of course, gets paid on that. From the Best of the West, he and I are the authors of those songs. Him on all of them, me on some of them. So look, we both get paid from that, and again, it was never formed with a with a bitter attitude. It wasn't, well, we'll show them, and
Right.
It's we were never meant to to compete with Megadeth. We were meant as a sort of dessert with Megadeth,
Right.
and
Right.
which is why it's not the only thing I do. It's one thing I do, in my sort of musical cachet at this point in my life. But again, it's something I'm tied to. People always want to come out and see me play Megadeth stuff. So I just wanted to find the right setting to do it so that it presented itself properly. And
Right.
Kings of Thrash is just a great vehicle to do that. And that's why I don't do it all the time. But when we ramp up, we'll go hit it. We got stuff this fall, Southern Cal run, and we got Florida. We got a kind of East Coast, Midwest run that we're going to do. So,
Swing through Oklahoma, man. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess. Well, look, there's one metalhead there, you, right?
Yeah.
So we got.
Well, there's the Diamond Ballroom. There's a bunch of places you guys could pack.
It's funny with Oklahoma City. We have tried to play that one outdoor amphitheater so many times. I remember we were there on the zoo. Yeah. The Mayhem tour. We came through another time on a Gigantor, and we got rained out both times. I think maybe one time we played, and then when we left, Disturbed was supposed to go on, and a rain came, and they couldn't finish the show, and then we went back with a Gigantor, and again this massive rolling blackout came through from these thunderstorms and tornadoes and knocked out all the power. And in fact, they couldn't even get the gear down because you need electricity to work those motors that hoist the sound and lights up into the rafters of the venue. So I mean, yeah, it's for it, just chaotic and it sucks because it's such a great town, and the zoo. I'm sure the animals want to rock out too. So
that's the name of the amphitheater, is just the zoo.
Yeah.
Speaking of small places, man, my son Zach lives in Brooklyn, who
Yeah. Right.
And God, this was several years ago. You were still in Megadeth, and you guys did a secret show in Brooklyn. And you invited him to the show, and he went.
Yeah,
it was only held like 100. It was like
St. Vitus. St. Vitus.
There you go, St. Vitus. Yep.
Yeah.
So you got him in. He went to the show, and he said that was probably one of the best concerts because it was just so small and intimate, and just the frenzy. He went in the pit. He goes, "I was at the bar, and then I ran into the pit." It was like, I think you only played like 4 or 5 songs, but he said it was just freaking insane.
And it's an interesting thing with Megadeth, because as big as we got and playing the bigger venues and stuff, and that's always fun because that's big time rock star kind of shit. At the heart of that band is essentially what we're doing with Kings of Thrash. It's 4 guys playing that old school. That's really the heart and soul of the band. Was that stuff. Killing Is My Business, Peace Sells, all the stuff from the 80s and certainly into Rest in Peace and that. But that was the stuff that just came natural to us. It was unpretentious. It wasn't thought out. It was very impulsive. It's just what sort of happened. The songs wrote themselves. They came very naturally, and you can feel it, and there's an authenticity about it. And the way those records are made, they're analog. They weren't all digitally produced. While I like digital production, making records in the digital domain can also just kill the heart and soul. All of a sudden, all you're hearing is all this. You can second guess yourself and overproduce, and you hear really organic human feel and natural takes that were laid down onto tape, and then pressed into vinyl and cassettes back in those days in the 80s. And you really feel it, man. There really is an emotion, that you feel on that. And when you went to the shows, it directly translated off the stage right into the audience. And again, let's go back to the beginning, the Metroplex, where we started here today. And I feel like Kings of Thrash replicates that very well. It's 4 guys on stage just playing the songs the way they were written. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. It's just really paying, homage to the spirit of that. And of course, Jeff Young and I were there together through a lot of that. And he played a lot of those songs when he was in the band at that time. So it kind of comes right back for him. So and I think that's the heart and soul of rock and roll, is that it needs to be heartfelt, authentic, and just unbridled, you know.
Yeah.
And that's where I think we win with Kings of Thrash.
Totally. Speaking of vinyl and that sound, do you collect vinyl?
Here's what I do. I buy everything on iTunes because that's when I'm traveling. That's usually in the car and an airplane. That's when I get to hear music finally. But I go on Amazon or eBay or whatever, and I buy the old vinyl sleeves, like the album covers, right? Like 38 Special and Montrose and BTO and all this kind of stuff. I buy them. And I don't even care if they have records in them, and I don't care if the records are scratched because I don't like the sound of vinyl very much. I mean, to me, that's how I learned how to play. Was sitting there lifting the needle, going back, right, lifted, go again, learn, and it was, it's how I learned how to play. But you know, I'm in the digital age listening, but I tell you what, I love looking at the big photos. You know, the gatefold records. I flip them over. You read all the credits. I love that. That was the part of the experience for me growing up, was because you look at these albums, Bachman Turner Overdrive or Sweet or whoever, and it's just, dude, these guys were superheroes, man. And I was just like, I want to be like them, man. That was, you know, you go from reading Marvel, Superman, or, you know, DC Comics, whatever, and then suddenly your Kiss album shows up. You go, oh my God, this is the real deal. Like, this is it. These are the superheroes I want to do. I don't want to be Superman anymore. And to me, the albums, part of that presentation.
Tap your mic real quick. I'm losing you again.
Okay, sorry. That's what the prep that presentation of the vinyl packaging is what sold the product. You know what I mean? It's again, to me, it was just like reading a freaking comic book, man. It was,
dude,
it was
Kiss Alive. I can't tell you how many hours I just stared at the cover of that record. Just,
I mean,
what are these guys
like
at home? What do they do when they wake up? Are they wearing the makeup out every day? Because you're young and impressionable. It's like,
totally.
You know, Paul Stanley must just be getting piles of chicks just dripping off of him. Look at him. You know what I mean? It's
like on the cover of Love Gun. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah, man. Real quick. Okay, I'm going to let you go after this. We're going to do a lightning round of this or that.
Okay.
Metallica or Slayer?
Metallica.
Iron Maiden or Judas Priest?
Judas Priest.
Thank you. We're going to have words if you said it.
Yeah.
You know about Love Priest.
And you saw Tom Morello's doing the new Judas Priest movie. Which,
I know. You know, I'm happy for him. I know he's going to kill it, but you know who wants to do that movie? You're looking at, of course,
dude. Yeah, you and me both of us here.
Yes,
we should ask Tom if we can help him.
Dude, I would die, man. Anthrax or Testament?
Anthrax.
Yeah. Pantera or Sepultura?
Wow.
Right.
That's a tiebreaker.
Okay.
Man, that's a tiebreaker. I might go for Sepultura.
Motorhead or Black Sabbath?
Black Sabbath.
Overkill or Exodus?
Overkill.
King's X or Dream Theater?
I'd go Dream Theater on that.
Rush or Yes?
Rush.
Alice in Chains or Soundgarden?
Alice in Chains.
Here's one. Megadeth with Marty Friedman or Chris Poland?
Dude, that's not even fair to make. Me
and I'm going to ask you to shit on anybody. It's like,
well, answer that because I lived and currently live even both eras by playing the songs in Kings of Thrash. So
exactly,
I'm going to say yes.
Okay, good answer.
Yes.
Ronnie James Dio or Halford?
Man, Halford.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Phil Anselmo or Cavalera?
God, here again. Yes.
Yeah.
Though, I mean, again, two different eras, two different sounds. On Tuesday, Anselmo. On Wednesday, Cavalera. You know what I mean? To me, that's not an either or. To me, it's a yes. I'll take both. Just depends on what mood I'm in that day.
Yeah.
And even back to your previous question about Pantera, Sepultura. It's funny. I still love Pantera power metal. That's the album that came out
Yep.
before they signed to Atco and Cowboys from Hell. I'm an, that's the era of Pantera I like is that. And they weren't such a sort of hardcore band like they became, by the time they did Vulgar Display. And I love Cowboys and I love Vulgar Display, but power metal, dude, they were still kind of Van Halen a little bit. And I fucking love that. That's why, to me, so if you're listening, you're watching and you haven't heard of power metal, go check that out. That was my entry point with Pantera. So that's why when you say Pantera, I think power metal versus Chaos AD. I mean, two totally different bands, two totally different eras for me.
Right. Ghost or Sleep Token?
Ghost.
Same. I got to say something about Ghost too, man. A lot of people shit on that band, right? They just, ABBA metal.
I love them.
Or whatever. I love them. They're the only band in the past 10 years that I love.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I absolutely love them. I deep dived all the parts, and it's just I think the whole thing about it is brilliant. Yeah, that's a no-brainer for me. Yeah.
And it's like Tobias Ford doesn't have the greatest voice on the planet at all. But dude, his melody, the musicianship of the musicians he brings in is second to none. You can't deny that. Like,
he's phenomenal. I mean, and I was talking to Dirk Verburen about this, in 2019, 2020, whatever. What, because he grew up in France. He was Belgian born, I think, grew up in France, so he being in that world with his band Soilwork, he goes, Tobias he always had like a cool death metal band. He was always kind of the most famous out of everybody in that genre, right? Being from Sweden, he was always ahead. He was the trendsetter. He was a little ahead. He was working it out, trying to find his way. And then obviously when he found success with Ghost, there it is. That's the path you follow. So I think the world of the guy. He's a great guy, cool dude, and just a fantastically creative guy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Bass players, Geezer Butler or Steve Harris?
I mean, look, I've probably studied more of Steve Harris parts. When I was talking about learning on vinyl, what I was thinking was the Killers album, because that's how I learned how to play the first two Iron Maiden albums. I was doing the needle drop on the vinyl. Yeah. I mean, so look, you can't have Steve without Geezer, right? I think that's just kind of the point, because there's a lot of they play somewhat similar. Even though Steve's style is, I guess, maybe a bit more faster and energetic. Yeah. The galloping thing. I mean, look, you can't have heavy metal without both of them. I mean, I wouldn't be here without either of those guys and both of those guys. So, the answer
to me, Geezer Butler's work on the Mob Rules is just mind-boggling.
Oh, dude, the Mob Rules is one of my favorite Sabbath records. It's unbelievable. The tones are great. The songs are great. And, watching Geezer play, it's so funny because it's like the claw. He just claws at the bass like a freaking like a vulture, you know what I mean? It's like it's violent, it's the attack, and it's just so, and yet he's this sweet, happy vegetarian guy, he's just so kind. Exactly. But when he plays bass, back to your question about my voice and my style and his playing, it's the same way. It's just and here's the other thing about both of those guys is, Steve, of course, is the songwriter for Iron Maiden primarily.
Yep.
Writes the lyrics and the bass parts, of course. Geezer, as we learned, wrote, lyrics, like I think almost all of the Sabbath lyrics, and was the bass player.
Right.
And, here's the third guy you'd throw in that I would have to just say yes to is Bob Daisley, who then went on to be, and then wrote not only great bass parts, but also wrote the lyrics to at least the first couple Ozzy records and a bunch of stuff after that. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Cliff Burton or Jason Newsted?
Yeah, I think I'd have to go with Cliff in Metallica.
Right.
I would go with Jason Newsted as my favorite Flotsam and Jetsam bass player, because Jason is a lot like me in the sense that he was the band leader. He was the real driving force. He was the businessman. he was the guy that really drove the bus. And it's funny because I just saw their drummer Kelly Smith this last weekend. So the irony.
Oh, really?
I
Oh, okay.
always, get caught up on stuff.
You know what bothers is when I see Metallica now, and Robert Trujillo is a monster bass player. He looks to me out of place in that band. You know what I mean?
Robert's got his own style. And it's funny,
does.
I just saw a reel the other day online where he was talking about his kind of crab walk, how he was doing it when he was playing with Ozzy. And Ozzy came over to him and kind of crab walked with him. And that sort of started that whole thing.
Yep.
And, it's funny for me, like Jason with Flotsam, to me, Robert Trujillo is Suicidal Tendencies. And what was the other band that he had? The funk. It was that funk.
It's the funk version of Suicidal,
Josh ended up becoming the bass player after Trujillo.
Groove. Or,
yeah. Why are we brain dead right now? Because we're old.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, infectious grooves. To me, that's Robert's absolute sweet spot, And I think Robert does a great job in Metallica, because you got a lot of guys you got to cover. You got to cover Cliff, which he was so unique. He's kind of uncoverable at some point, but I think Robert does a great job. Then he's got to cover Newsted, which was a pick player. And Newsted, the thing that impressed me about Newsted with Metallica was I remember when we did these shows with him in 1993, it was the Nowhere Else to Roam leg of the Black Album tour, right? And they were playing these kind of Eastern European countries. I remember we played the stadium in Budapest and sold out. I mean, there's just Metallica were just unstoppable, crushing. They were like their own political party. They just had the crowd in their hands. They could do anything they wanted, But Newsted was such a presence. He was singing songs. He would take over vocal duties. I mean, he made himself so necessary to that band, and he found a lane. It's like, how do you join a band like that with that kind of success to take over from Cliff Burton, who has a fan base that's so loyal to him? How do you even find a lane in that? And he did. He found a path where he could have literally his own voice, his own presence, and how do you even sing lead at all when James Hetfield is your lead singer? I mean, at that, that sound of his voice was so dominating as a presence, but he would acquiesce and let Newsted take a couple songs, and that, to me, what I loved about that is they felt very much like a 4-piece band, kind of like Megadeth in the 90s with Rust in Peace,
Right.
We kind of mirrored each other like that we were it felt very much like a band,
Yeah. All right, dude. Well, man, thank you so much for hanging with me.
You're welcome. Man, we're coming up on almost 2 hours, good hour and a half. That's awesome.
I know. I can go
this is like our updated Waffle House hang right here.
Exactly, man. So I want to have you back on after your Black Sabbath event in England.
Yes.
After July. We have to talk. I want to know what that was like, what you're jamming on, who you hung with, and the whole story, because
I agree.
Let's epic, man.
Let's do a Monday morning quarterback recap of that.
Absolutely.
I think that's a great idea.
Yep.
All right, Fran, awesome, buddy. Thanks for having me on. It's great to see you, man.
You too, man. Love you, man.
Love you too, buddy. To be continued. See you. Bye.
Yes.
Bye.
See you. Bye.
Bye.